This is the best style to do it, the young giant bride said to the virgin cowboy. He put his mouth on it and froze in shock. Martha May Donovan's massive hand trembled as she guided her virgin cowboy husband's fingers to her lips on their wedding night, whispering words that made Jesse Samuel Pritchard's entire body go rigid with shock. This is the best style to do it. The 24-year-old giant mail-order bride, all 6 feet 2 inches of her, sat on the edge of the bed in her simple white wedding dress, towering over the 5'7" rancher who'd never so much as held a woman's hand before tonight. Jesse's breath came in short, panicked gasps as Martha slowly, deliberately brought his trembling hand closer to her warm mouth, her Norwegian accent soft but steady. "Just trust me, Jesse. This is how we begin." When his fingers finally touched her lips, when he leaned forward and put his mouth on her hand to kiss it for the very first time in his 28 years, Jesse froze completely, his green eyes wide with terror and something else, something he'd never felt before. The young giant bride smiled at her paralyzed virgin cowboy, her own heart pounding, knowing she was about to teach this gentle, frightened man things that would change them both forever. But what had Martha whispered to Jesse in those final seconds before he froze? What secret method did this towering mail-order bride know that could transform a man who'd never touched a woman? And why had Jesse Pritchard, successful Montana rancher who could have any local girl ordered a bride from a catalog in the first place? More importantly, what would happen when this virgin cowboy finally unfroze and discovered what his giant wife had planned for the rest of their wedding night? But to understand how they arrived at this moment, we have to go back 3 weeks earlier, to the day Martha May Donovan stepped off the train in Silver Creek, Montana Territory, and saw her future husband for the very first time. The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty train platform as Martha climbed down the metal steps, her worn carpetbag clutched in both hands. She was used to the stares. Back in Minnesota, people always stared. Men looked up at her with fear in their eyes, or worse, with disgust. Women whispered behind their hands, calling her unnatural, too big, unwomanly. 3 different men had proposed to her over the years, and all 3 had changed their minds the moment they stood next to her and realized she could look them straight in the eye, or down at them. She spotted Jesse immediately. He was the only man on the platform holding a hat in his hands, twisting it nervously, his eyes scanning the departing passengers. He was shorter than she expected, much shorter. Her heart sank. "Mr. Pritchard?" She called out, her voice carrying across the platform. Jesse turned, and his face went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stood there, frozen, staring up at her like she was a ghost or a giant from a storybook. Martha had seen that look before. That look that said she was too much, too big, too impossible. She set down her bag and straightened her shoulders. "I'm Martha May Donovan, your bride." Jesse's hat fell from his hands into the dust. He bent down quickly to retrieve it, his face turning red. When he stood up again, he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. Yes, I'm Jesse Samuel Pritchard." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't? The advertisement didn't mention I'm 6 feet 2 inches tall?" Martha finished for him, her voice flat. She'd learned to say it plainly, to get it out in the open before the humiliation dragged on. "Didn't mention that I'm bigger than most men, you know? That I can lift a full grain sack on each shoulder? That I've got hands that can snap a chicken's neck and arms that can wrestle a calf to the ground?" Jesse's eyes went wide. "No, ma'am. The advertisement said you were strong, said you could handle ranch work, said you were honest and hardworking and kind." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "It didn't say nothing about your height." Martha waited for what always came next. The apology, the rejection, the stammering explanation about how this wasn't going to work, how he'd made a mistake, how he'd pay for her ticket back to Minnesota. But Jesse didn't say any of that. Instead, he picked up her carpetbag, struggling a bit with the weight of it, and gestured toward a wagon at the end of the platform. "The Reverend's waiting at the church. We can get married today if that's still what you want." He looked up at her, and Martha saw something in his green eyes she'd never seen in a man's eyes before. Not desire exactly, not fear either. It was something softer, something that looked almost like hope. "I know I'm not what you expected neither. I'm small. I'm quiet. I don't know much about talking to women or anything like that." His voice dropped even lower. "But I need a wife, Miss Donovan, and I promise I'll treat you with respect. I'll work hard to make you happy. I'll never raise my hand to you or speak cruel. That's my word." Martha felt something crack open in her chest. In 3 weeks of traveling, she'd convinced herself this would end like all the others, with disappointment and shame. But here was this tiny cowboy, looking up at her with honest eyes, offering her something no man ever had, a chance. "Then let's go to the church," she said quietly, "before you change your mind." Jesse shook his head. "I won't change my mind, ma'am. I'm a man of my word." And he wasn't lying. 2 hours later, Martha May Donovan became Martha May Pritchard in a ceremony so quick and quiet it felt more like a business transaction than a wedding. The Reverend kept glancing between them with raised eyebrows. Jesse's hands shook so badly he could barely slide the simple gold band onto her finger. Martha had to bend down so he could reach, and she heard him whisper, "I'm sorry," under his breath, though. She didn't know what he was apologizing for. When the Reverend said Jesse could kiss his bride, the little cowboy went absolutely rigid. He stared up at Martha's lips, then down at his boots, then back up again, his face turning crimson. The silence stretched out so long it became painful. Finally, Martha bent down, took his face gently in her huge hands, and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his forehead. "There," she whispered. "That'll do for now." Jesse looked like he might faint. They rode back to his ranch in complete silence, the wagon creaking beneath them, the Montana sky turning pink and gold as the sun set. Martha studied her new husband from the corner of her eye. He sat stiff as a board, his hands gripping the reins so tight his knuckles were white. Every few minutes he'd glance at her, then quickly look away, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "You can look at me, Jesse," Martha said finally. "I'm your wife now. You're allowed." "I know, ma'am. I don't want to be disrespectful." "How is looking at me disrespectful?" Jesse was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so soft she almost didn't hear it, he said, "My aunt raised me after my parents died. She taught me that ... that women were delicate, sacred, that a man shouldn't look at a woman too long or touch her, except when necessary. That wanting, that having desires, was sinful." He swallowed hard. She said, "Good men protect women? They don't. They don't think about them the way I've been thinking about you since you stepped off that train." Martha's breath caught. "And how have you been thinking about me?" Jesse's face went scarlet. He didn't answer. When they reached the ranch, a small but well-kept property with a sturdy house, a barn, and fenced pastures stretching toward the mountains, Jesse helped Martha down from the wagon. His hands on her waist were feather-light, terrified. He showed her the house, the kitchen, the bedroom, speaking in short, clipped sentences, never quite meeting her eyes. "You can sleep in here," he said, gesturing to the bedroom. "I'll take the barn." "The barn?" Martha turned to him. "Jesse, we're married." "I know, but I don't. I can't." He backed toward the door, his eyes wild with panic. "I need to tend the horses." You must be tired from traveling. There's food in the kitchen. I'll see you in the morning." And then he was gone, practically running out of the house. Martha stood alone in the quiet bedroom, her wedding ring feeling heavy on her finger. She'd expected rejection, yes, but she hadn't expected this, a husband so terrified of her, he'd rather sleep with the animals. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, still wearing her wedding dress, and let out a long, shaky breath. What had she gotten herself into? And how was she supposed to build a life with a man who couldn't even look at her without trembling? Martha didn't sleep that first night. She lay on top of the quilts, still fully dressed, staring at the wooden ceiling beams and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana night coyotes yipping in the distance, the wind rattling the window panes, the lonely creak of the house settling. Every hour or so she'd hear footsteps on the porch, then silence, then the footsteps retreating. Jessie, she realized, checking on her, making sure she was safe, but too scared to actually come inside. When dawn broke pale and cold through the curtains, Martha rose, braided her long blonde hair, and went to the kitchen. If she was going to be stuck in this strange marriage with this terrified little man, she might as well make herself useful. She found flour, eggs, salt pork, and got to work. By the time the sun was fully up, she'd made biscuits, gravy, fried eggs, and strong coffee. The smell filled the house, drifting out through the open windows. She heard the front door creak open. Soft footsteps. Then Jessie's voice, uncertain. "Ma'am?" "In the kitchen," Martha called. "Breakfast is ready." Jessie appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands again, his dark hair mussed from sleep, bits of hay clinging to his shirt. He'd clearly spent the night in the barn, just like he'd said. His eyes went wide when he saw the spread on the table. You didn't have to do all this." "I'm your wife, Jessie. Cooking breakfast is the least I can do." Martha poured him a cup of coffee and set it at his place. "Sit, eat. You look half-starved." Jessie sat down slowly, like he expected the chair to bite him. He picked up his fork, then set it down, picked it up again. His hands were shaking. "I'm sorry about last night. Running off like that. It wasn't. I didn't mean to make you feel unwanted." Martha sat down across from him, her own coffee cup warm between her palms. "Then why did you run?" "Because I wanted to stay." Jessie's voice cracked. "I wanted to stay so badly, it scared me. When you bent down to kiss me at the church, when I felt your hands on my face, I thought my heart was going to explode right out of my chest. I've never felt anything like that before. Never wanted anything like I wanted." He stopped, his face going red again. "My aunt told me those feelings were wrong, that a man who can't control himself around a woman is no better than an animal. So I left before I did something shameful." Martha stared at him. "Jessie, we're married. There's nothing shameful about a husband wanting his wife." "But I don't know how," Jessie whispered, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I don't know how to be a husband. I don't know how to touch you or talk to you or any of it. Back in Minnesota, didn't you have men courting you? Men who knew what they were doing?" Martha let out a harsh laugh. "Men courting me? Jessie, look at me. Really look at me." She stood up, her height filling the small kitchen. "I'm 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and bone. I've got shoulders wider than most men, hands that can break wood, a voice that's too loud, and a face that's too plain. The men back home called me Goliath. They called me the Norwegian giant. They said I was unnatural, that God made a mistake when he made me." Her voice shook. "3 men proposed to me over the years, and you know why. Because they needed free labor. They needed someone strong enough to work like a man, but too desperate to ask for wages. And the minute they found someone prettier, someone smaller, someone normal, They broke it off. She sat back down heavily, her eyes burning. So no, Jesse, I didn't have men courting me. I had men using me. You're the first man who ever married me, even knowing what I am, even seeing me. So if you're scared, if you don't know what to do, then that makes two of us. Because I don't know how to be a wife either. I only know how to work hard and try not to take up too much space. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Jesse stared at her, his green eyes bright with something that looked like tears. Then, very slowly, he reached across the table and placed his small, calloused hand on top of her large one. "You're not a mistake," he said quietly. "And you're not unnatural. You're just ... Martha, my wife. And I think," he swallowed hard, "I think maybe God knew exactly what he was doing when he made you. Because maybe he made you for me. Someone strong enough to not break. Someone brave enough to come all this way. Someone honest enough to tell me the truth even when it hurts." Martha felt tears spill down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned her hand over beneath his, and their fingers intertwined her hand, swallowing his. But somehow fitting perfectly anyway. "We don't have to figure everything out today," Jesse continued, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "We can go slow. We can learn together. But I want you to know something, Martha. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're my wife. And I'm going to do everything I can to make you glad you stayed." Martha wiped her eyes with her free hand. Okay. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, their hands still touching across the table. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Jesse showed Martha around the ranch the cattle in the east pasture, the chickens that needed feeding, the vegetable garden that had gone to weeds after his aunt passed 2 years ago. Martha threw herself into the work with fierce determination, grateful to finally have something to do with her restless energy. She mended fences that Jesse couldn't reach, hauled water barrels he couldn't lift, and cleared brush that would have taken him days to manage alone. Every evening, they'd sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Jesse would tell her stories about growing up on this land, about his parents who died when he was 12, about his aunt who raised him with an iron fist and endless rules about sin and righteousness. Martha would tell him about Norway, about her family's failed farm, about the long journey to America, and the crushing loneliness of always being different. And slowly, carefully, they began to touch. Jesse would take her hand while they walked. Martha would rest her head on his shoulder, bending down awkwardly to do it, while they sat on the porch. Once, when Martha was reaching for a high shelf, Jesse came up behind her and steadied her by placing both hands on her waist. She'd frozen, her heart hammering, but he didn't pull away. He just held her there for a moment, his breath warm against her back, before stepping aside. They were learning each other, learning the shape of each other's fears and the texture of each other's loneliness. But they still hadn't kissed. Not really. And Jesse still slept in the barn every single night, no matter how much Martha insisted he take to bed. 2 weeks after the wedding, Martha was in town buying supplies when she overheard the whispers. She was standing at the counter in the general store, waiting for the clerk to wrap her order, when 2 women came in behind her. "Did you see them at church on Sunday?" One of them hissed. "That giant woman and that tiny little man? It's unnatural, Constance. Absolutely unnatural." "I heard she's a mail-order bride," the other woman whispered back. "Probably couldn't find a husband anywhere else. What kind of man orders a woman from a catalog? The desperate one, that's what kind. And did you see how she towers over him? Like a mother standing next to her child. How are they supposed to, you know, on their wedding night? The mechanics of it don't even make sense." Both women burst into giggles. Martha's hands clenched into fists on the counter. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, glanced at her sympathetically. Don't listen to them, Mrs. Pritchard, he said quietly. People in small towns always need something to gossip about. But Martha barely heard him. The old shame was flooding back, hot and suffocating, unnatural, giant, wrong. She grabbed her supplies and walked out without a word. Her vision blurring with tears, she refused to shed in public. She drove the wagon back to the ranch in a daze, the women's laughter echoing in her ears. When she got home, Jesse was in the barn shoeing a horse. He looked up when she entered, his face brightening, then immediately falling when he saw her expression. Martha? What happened? Nothing. She began unloading the supplies with jerky, angry movements. Just heard some women in town talking. That's all. Talking about what? About us. The words exploded out of her. About how unnatural we look together. About how you must be desperate to marry someone like me. About how the mechanics of our wedding night don't even make sense. She threw a sack of flour onto the ground so hard it split, sending white powder everywhere. And you know what the worst part is? They're right. We don't make sense. You can't even stand to sleep in the same house as me. You run away every time we get close. Maybe those women are right. Maybe this whole thing is just ... wrong. Jesse set down his tools and walked toward her slowly. Those women don't know anything about us, don't they? Martha's voice broke. Jesse, we've been married 2 weeks, and you haven't even kissed me. Not once. You sleep in the barn, like I'm some kind of monster you're afraid of. You can barely look at me without shaking. So tell me, what are people supposed to think? I'm not afraid of you, Jesse said quietly. Then what are you afraid of? Jesse's jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I'm afraid of wanting you too much. I'm afraid that if I start touching you, I won't be able to stop. I'm afraid that all these feelings I've got, these desires that my aunt told me were sinful, will take over and heal. I'll hurt you or scare you, or do something wrong. I've never done any of this before, Martha. I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know how to control myself. So I stay away, because staying away feels safer than messing everything up. Martha stared at him, her anger draining away. Jesse, you couldn't hurt me if you tried. I'm twice your size. That's not what I mean. Jesse stepped closer, close enough that Martha could see the desperation in his eyes. I mean hurt you here. He pressed his hand to his own chest. I mean do something that makes you feel used or scared or ashamed. I'd rather sleep in the barn for the rest of my life and make you feel the way those women in town made you feel today. Something shifted in Martha's chest. She reached out and cupped Jesse's face in her huge hands, the way she had at their wedding. Jesse Samuel Pritchard, listen to me. I don't need you to be perfect. I don't need you to know what you're doing. I just need you to try. With me. Together. Jesse's eyes searched hers. You're sure? I'm sure. Then tonight, Jesse whispered, his voice shaking. Tonight I'll sleep in the house. In our room. And we'll figure out the rest together. Martha's heart thundered in her chest. Okay. That evening, after supper, after the dishes were washed and the animals were fed, Martha stood in the bedroom, brushing out her long blonde hair, her hands trembling. She heard Jesse's footsteps on the stairs, heard him pause outside the door, heard him take a deep, shaky breath before finally turning the handle and stepping inside. He looked terrified. She probably looked terrified too, but neither of them ran. Jesse closed the bedroom door behind him with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the silence. Martha set down her brush, her hands shaking. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the bed between them like an ocean neither knew how to cross. I don't know where to start, Jesse whispered, Martha's throat was dry. Neither do I. Jesse took a tentative step forward, then another. When he reached the bed, he sat down on the edge, his boots still on, his hands gripping his knees. Martha watched him for a moment, then moved to sit beside him. The bed dipped under her weight, and Jesse slid slightly toward her. He didn't move away. "Those women in town," Jesse said quietly, "they're wrong about us. About you. You're not too much, Martha. You're not unnatural or wrong, or any of those terrible things people have called you." He turned to look up at her, his green eyes fierce. "You're beautiful, strong, the bravest person I've ever met. And I'm the luckiest man alive that you chose to stay." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "You really mean that?" "Every word." Jesse reached up and touched her face with trembling fingers, tracing the line of her jaw. "I want to kiss you. A real kiss. But I don't know how." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. She took his small, calloused hand in both of hers. "Then let me show you. This is the best style to do it honest, slow, together." She lifted his hand to her lips and pressed a soft kiss to his knuckles. Jesse's breath hitched. She kissed each finger, one by one, her eyes never leaving his. His whole body was trembling now, but he didn't pull away. "Your turn," she whispered, guiding his hand to her face. Jesse's fingers brushed across her cheek, her temple, her lips. Then, moving on pure instinct, he leaned forward and put his mouth on her hand, kissing her palm with such tenderness it made her heart ache. But the moment his lips touched her skin, he froze completely. His eyes went wide. His breath stopped. He just sat there, paralyzed, his mouth still pressed to her hand, like the sensation had short-circuited every thought in his brain. Martha waited, her pulse racing. "Jesse?" He didn't respond, didn't move. He was frozen in absolute shock, overwhelmed by the first real intimate touch of his entire life. Martha held perfectly still, her hand cradled against Jesse's frozen lips, feeling his rapid heartbeat through his trembling fingers. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Then, slowly, Jesse's eyes began to focus again. He pulled back, gasping like he'd been underwater, his face flushed crimson. "I'm sorry, I couldn't." His voice was hoarse, raw with emotion. "I felt everything all at once, and it was too much, and I didn't know what to do with it all." Martha smiled softly. "That's okay. We have time." "No." Jesse shook his head, his jaw setting with sudden determination. "No more running. No more being afraid." He stood up. Then, and this is what broke Martha's heart wide open, he climbed onto the bed and stood on it, raising himself up so he was finally, for the first time, taller than his giant wife. "I want to do this right." Martha looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Jesse, what are you?" "I'm going to kiss you properly," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "The way a husband should kiss his wife. The way you deserve to be kissed. I don't care if I don't know what I'm doing. I don't care if I'm scared. You're worth being brave for." He cupped her face in both his hands, and Martha's breath caught as he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. It was clumsy and awkward, and their noses bumped, and neither of them really knew what they were doing, but it was perfect. It was theirs. When they finally pulled apart, both gasping, Jesse was crying too. "I love you," he whispered. "I think I've loved you since you stepped off that train. Since you didn't laugh at me for being small. Since you stayed, even though you had every reason to leave." Martha pulled him down off the bed and into her arms, holding him against her chest like something precious. "I love you too, my brave, gentle, beautiful man." They stood there in the lamplight, the giant mail-order bride and her virgin cowboy, learning each other's bodies and hearts with trembling hands and whispered promises. And for the first time in their lives, neither of them felt too much or too little. They felt exactly right. The next morning, Jesse didn't go to the barn. He woke up in his own bed, wrapped in his wife's strong arms, and finally understood what his aunt had gotten wrong all those years. Desire wasn't sinful when it came from love. Touch wasn't shameful when it came from tenderness. And two people who didn't fit the world's expectations could still fit together perfectly. 3 months later, when Jesse's aunt arrived unannounced to save him from his mistake, she found Martha and Jesse working side by side in the garden, laughing together. When she demanded Jesse annul the marriage, he did something he'd never done in his entire life. He stood up to her. "This is my wife," Jesse said firmly, taking Martha's huge hand in his. "And I love her. If you can't respect that, then you're not welcome in our home." His aunt left in a huff, and they never saw her again. The town gossips eventually found someone else to whisper about. And Martha and Jesse built a life together that was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful, filled with laughter and hard work and the kind of love that only comes from two broken people choosing to heal each other. Years later, when people asked Martha what made her marriage work, she'd smile and say, "We learned the best style to do it honest, slow, together. And we never stopped learning." And Jesse, standing on his toes to kiss his wife's cheek, would add with a grin, "Sometimes the best things in life come in unexpected packages. You just have to be brave enough not to send them back." Before we end, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? We love hearing from viewers all around the world. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next emotional journey. Your support means everything to us. Until next time, remember, love doesn't measure in inches. It measures in courage.